views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. So here's how we're going to start tonight's program. Have you ever been stuck in traffic in the Bronx over the last year, let's say? On the Cross Bronx, on the Major Deegan Expressway, on the Bruckner, on our streets and roads coming west from Pelham Parkway to the West Bronx, or from the West Bronx going to Pelham Parkway in the East Bronx, or down at the Hub. These days, I can tell you this show was inspired by the fact that been driving in the Bronx for 50 years, and it has never been more crowded, and driver behavior has never been worse. I've been cut off. I get tailgated. You make a left turn and somebody swerves around you. And that's what we're going to do tonight. We've brought two excellent experts with us to go through why we're in this mess, how we can maybe address this mess, and what the future is for intra-Bronx transportation. So let me introduce our two excellent guests. The Senior Manager of Public Affairs at AAA Northeast, my longtime friend, Robert Sinclair Jr. Nice to see you again, Robert.
Good to see you, Gary.
Excuse me. And the Peter W. Herman Chair for Transportation of the Regional Plan Association. It is Dr. Rachel Weinberger. Dr. Weinberger, nice to have you with us.
Really glad to be with you. Nice to be with Robert. Nice to meet you, Gary. Please, everybody, just call me Rachel.
Okay, we will. We'll be nice. People of the Bronx respect informality because we're just trying to get the problem solved. So there's the problem. I'm going to show you a graphic here that I just did a little research and pulled up. If you look at Bronx car accidents between January, March 2021 to 1 year later, January to March 2022, you can see that there is has been a 10.8% increase in total crashes. Accordingly, injuries are up 11.7%. And unfortunately and tragically, fatalities, also more fatalities in a 3-month period, 27.2%. And I'll just caution people to say, well, only 11. We have 1.4 million people here. That doesn't sound like a lot. Think about those 11 families and think about the fact that those numbers are up compared to the past. So, Robert Sinclair Jr., you and I have talked at length for a long time about traffic and the way people drive. My take, since the pandemic, people are driving worse. Am I wrong? Is there a way to measure that? And then, of course, let's try to understand why that might be.
Well, certainly from driving around the city, I would concur with you very strongly that people are driving worse. The numbers bear it out. You mentioned Bronx-specific numbers. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has released data on the first 9 months of last year compared to the first 9 months of 2020, and the number of fatalities, injuries, all these things are up, and the federal government is laying it at the feet of drivers and saying that they are speeding, they are distracted, they are driving impaired both by alcohol and more these days by marijuana. And stunningly, they are not wearing their seatbelts.
Wow. I wasn't aware of that seatbelt concept. That doesn't make any sense.
None of it does. But distracted driving, in fact, is up so much that we have seen an across the board increase in insurance rates for all drivers of 10 to 15% because of the level of distracted driving crashes. And we did a study in 2020 during the pandemic of speed camera data. And we looked at the numbers from January 1st through March 13th. number of speed camera tickets issued. And then we looked at the numbers from March 16th to May 22nd. And March 13th in 2020 was when the schools closed. Now, for that first roughly 3 months, there were 23 violations per day. And in that second 3 months, from March 16th to May 22nd, there was an average of 33 violations per day, a 43% increase.
I just have to interject. I would think it would have been the other way around, because certainly when I looked out my window, there was nobody driving. I mean, everybody had shut down. And I was like, well, I guess we're not going to have any problems on the roads now.
Well, in fact, I remember one day that during the lockdowns that there were 2 lanes of the major Deegan that were closed for construction and there were no delays. But those who were out there were pedal to the metal. And Manhattan specifically saw a 149% increase in the number of speed camera violations. And a couple of locations really jumped out. West Street at Leroy Street. During the lockdown, they were averaging 381 speed tickets per day, a total of 19,027. Prior to the lockdown, it was 52 per day, a total of 2,643.
So,
that was a 634% increase in the number of violations at that one location.
Nobody would doubt any of the numbers. Certainly if you drive like I do, and I do ride a bike, by the way. So, don't say, oh, you can then get out of your car. We're going to talk about that. But what is I'm just going to suggest, people were cooped up for a long time. They said, you know what? I just got to get mines, kind of thing. And let's just talk about the psychology or the sociology of what might be going on right now. And then we'll bring Rachel into the conversation as well.
Well, I hearken back to my dear departed grandfather, who didn't teach me how to drive, but he taught me a lot about driving. And he used to say that the open road is like the siren song to the speeder. And that's what a lot of drivers were seeing during the lockout. Open road, empty roads. There were far more violations with fewer vehicles on the road compared to when there were more vehicles on the road. More vehicles, more traffic. You can't go as fast. So I think that's what happened, that when drivers were seeing these empty roads, they just lost their minds and were speeding like crazy, and the numbers bear it out. And it seems to be a phenomenon that was nationwide.
And it's still going on. That's the point. We're now, we've certainly come down from the pandemic to a large degree, but it's still the case.
Those that develop those bad habits still have those bad habits, despite the fact that there are many more vehicles on the road, without a doubt.
Rachel Weinberger, you deal with so many traffic issues. Let's just start with driver behavior, and then we'll move to other concepts on how we can address these things. Do you want to talk about the psychology of what's going on behind the wheel? I'll give you an example. I'm making a right, getting off the highway, the Major Deegan, as a matter of fact, on the right side. And there were some cars to the right. So I was just slowing up to fit myself in. I was signaling all the way. Some truck came behind me, had to be 5 feet from my car, trying to squeeze me. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? The only thing you're going to do is cause an accident. It makes no sense. For what? For the 15 seconds he's going to save? He can speed up after I go anyway. It's crazy. Go ahead.
That is a little crazy. My hats off to Robert's. Was it your great grandfather you said, or your grandfather?
Yeah.
Right. But that's exactly how a traffic engineer or an economist also would think about it. And that's where all the evidence is. There is nothing like an open road to get you to hurry up. That's because driving becomes like an amusement park ride. Right. So most of the highways across the country, in fact, are overbuilt for the speed limits, which makes it, I don't know if you've noticed this while you're driving, but I pay a lot of attention to this. It is often very difficult to actually drive the speed limit because all of the design cues and all of the landscape surrounding typically is saying to you, this road was designed for you to drive faster than what the posted speed limit is. And so that's the result you get. The traffic that we traditionally have had, and now we're back to again, so we'll talk about that in a second, has had a very calming effect on speeders. So, but then, yes, people have now gotten into this idea that it doesn't, the trip that used to take them an hour under congested conditions, they experienced in the past year in 30 minutes. And so they still think it's a 30-minute trip when they're speeding. And what this really does, if you don't mind me just
go ahead.
making this plug for the city, it really underscores how important is the speed camera data that Robert was talking about. The city does not actually have much control over the number of speed cameras it can use and where we can place them. The city can place them where they want to, but it's the state that keeps very tight control. And the city is repeatedly going to Albany and trying to get authorization to use camera enforcement because there's just not enough personnel to put out there to enforce the speeding. I wrote an op-ed for Daily News about 10, 15 years ago talking about speeding. And on average, a speeder would get caught once every 10 years, right? Because we don't have the enforcement tools that we need here in the city.
Well, speeding, of course, is not the only issue that I raised. I mean, I just use an example that happened to me not too long ago. Making a left turn, somebody zooms around from behind me and tries to beat me around, when there's pedestrians there. I mean, that can only cause a problem. Do we need to do more? And we'll get you both to weigh in. Rachel, we'll ask you first. Do we need to do more in driver education, or maybe re-education, or when you renew your driver's license, maybe require another test or a reminder, or show a video, do something? Seems to me there's nothing out there to curb that behavior. I'm driving 55 miles an hour, which is the speed limit on the Major Deegan Expressway. Maybe even, I think it might even be 50 in some spots. And there's somebody tailgating me, and I'm in the middle lane tailgating me because I'm for some reason not going fast enough. It's not only the speeding, it's just some crazy mentality. So I could go on with this, I promise you. But Rachel, what do you think? Driver education, and what could we do? What would make sense? And what would people be interested in?
There's a number of things. I think one is, I've emphasized the speeding because that's, the fatality crashes are really due to the speeding. If you're hit by a car exceeding 30 miles an hour, you are most likely killed in that crash. But if you're hit by a pedestrian, hit by a car at driving below 20, then they'll survive that crash. So that's the emphasis on the speeding. In terms of the bad manners and the bad behavior, some of it is just a question of street design, and that's something that the Department of Transportation can focus on, and they have throughout the city. But some of it is just bad manners. Some of it is aggressiveness. Some of it is this sort of rat race, fight for territory that we have, mentality in the city. And driver's ed could make a huge difference. I don't know about you two. I have been driving for 43
We're not counting.
years.
Okay, we could.
I'm just saying, and I have never been asked since I was 15 years old. Now you can do the math. I have never been asked again a single question about the rules of the road or courtesy or when to use my signal or when not to.
Well, this was my point. Yeah, that some people just need that re-education. Yeah.
Also in driver's ed, the way we emphasize driver's ed here is quite different from other countries. In Germany, for example, more than half of the questions on the driving test relate to what a driver is supposed to do in the presence of pedestrians and cyclists. We have none of that. You
know what I discovered, unfortunately, I had a police officer sitting and waiting for that to happen. I made a right turn. I was in Manhattan on Broadway, made a right turn on 72nd Street with no traffic around. And he pulled me over saying there was a pedestrian in the crosswalk. That's to be determined. But he said, you've got to wait until the pedestrian actually steps on the other side of the curb, so that even if you thought on your lane that you were okay because the pedestrian was long gone of a wide street, you've got to wait. So anyway, I'd never heard that rule, and I've been driving for all this time. Robert, your thought about re-education? Would you vote for asking people to get relicensed or some other qualification?
Well, there are courses available. AAA teaches them, among other organizations like National Safety Council, AARP. Ours is called the Driver Improvement Program, and it's certified by the State Department of Motor Vehicles to give you a discount on your insurance and have points removed from your license if you do have them. It's a refresher course I remember a philosopher said we need not be taught so much as we need be reminded. And it seems that a lot of people have forgotten basic rules of the road, like signaling, like slower traffic, keep right, that the left lane is for passing. So these refresher courses, I think, would be very good for all drivers to take. But we need to start doing more and better driver education, starting with youngsters in grade school, teaching them the rules of the road, how to be good pedestrians, and slowly morphing into how to be good drivers, because bad young drivers become bad adult drivers. And we need more and more education. A lot of people are just, throwing their hands up and saying, oh, autonomous vehicles or these advanced driver assistance systems, these ADAS technologies will help improve the situation with automatic emergency braking.
No. This is a human problem.
I agree fully. And we need to solve it by human means. And all these technologies are not going to be the answer.
There's no doubt there are more cars on the road than ever before. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, normal streets leading to highways now in the Bronx are backed up. I see it all the time, not only in my own neighborhood, but all over the Bronx. One of the solutions that's out there, but the legislature has not moved forward, we'll ask you both about it. Robert, you can start, and that is the idea of congestion pricing, specifically for Manhattan, charging drivers who drive, the details are still out there. Do you like the idea of congestion pricing? And in terms of crafting the right one, Robert, do you what would you like to see? What would work, if anything, in this realm?
Well, congestion pricing is just an idea right now. There are no details, how much it will be, when it would be in effect, that sort of thing. A couple of things that we think should be part of it is, since congestion pricing is designed to reduce congestion at particular times of day, we think that drivers should be incentivized to travel outside those times, that perhaps during the times of least congestion, there would be no cost imposed on drivers. Also, that there needs to be, we think there should not be any kind of variable tolling, as has been considered. And if there is going to be variable tolling, certainly you need to clearly communicate that to everyone.
When you say variable tolling, you mean below
certain days,
certain
times, the tolls would be higher. Yeah.
Well, that gets very complicated.
That gets extremely complicated, particularly if you're trying to work outside of those things. I mean, for some people, for many drivers, congestion pricing will be a very difficult financial
a really big thing. Rachel, Regional Plan Association's point of view on congestion pricing, are we on the way to having it happen? Do you think it's a good idea? Does RPA support it? And what detail would you like to see?
Well, RPA does support it, and I personally support it as well. It's nice when you can be, consistent with the people that you work with.
Yes.
In terms of I'm not sure, Robert, that I followed you exactly. You were suggesting that it should be free during uncongested periods, but it also shouldn't be variable. So I'm not sure. I mean, there has to be. It can't be free at some times, and there's a price at other times, and it isn't variable. So,
then there needs to be that consistency. Yes.
Okay. So in our research at RPA, we see there are the greatest benefits in terms of congestion, in terms of travel speeds, would be to have it most expensive during the most peaked demand periods, right? You get the best travel speed improvements there. In terms of the burden that it would be, there are some exceptions written to the legislation, particularly Manhattan households that earn under a certain income level. Those will be credited any congestion pricing fees. The reality is that the people who, on average, most of the people driving into Manhattan during the heavy commute period do have higher paying jobs. And so but the more important equity element there is that the proceeds are intended to fund MTA's capital program.
That's an important thing.
Alternatives. Right. That's a critical element of it.
Because you don't want to get into what happened with the lottery, that they're still waiting for those monies to be delivered to schools and education. So we certainly don't want to go there. Rachel, I want to ask you about a conceptual thing. People say, well, wait a minute, we need to redo the roads. We need to handle this in a different way, make different kinds of plans. It is, after all, the Regional Plan Association. But you were talking to me a little bit about the connection between when you create roads to do it for health equity. And the folks talking about capping the Cross Bronx are probably right along with you. Talk to me about the relationship between whatever designs we come up with, that it should, and certainly in the Bronx where our health indicators are a major problem, where it would work to maybe even improve health.
So the Cross Bronx Expressway is almost like fish in a barrel. It is so easy to pick on. The rates,
and don't we love to
rates,
do that?
the asthma hospitalizations for children alongside in the Cross Bronx corridor are higher than anywhere else in the region, and we have very good evidence. We have a case study during the Atlanta Olympics. They pretty much shut down automobile traffic, which meant particulate matter went down. Asthma hospitalizations went almost to zero, right? So just in terms of the pollution, the diesel, the emissions, all of that stuff, all of the environmental bads that are associated with travel in that corridor are felt by the people who live in that area. And so that is a tremendous inequity. So much of that traffic is not bound for the Bronx. So much of it is just going through. So all of the travel benefit is accruing to people, to
elsewhere,
the north,
yeah.
south, and all of the burden is felt by the people of the Bronx.
So the road designers, what should they be thinking about?
Well, that's a highway that can be capped. That would be useful.
Yes.
Another thing, though, is vehicle design, right? And there is improvement in technology. So you can get cleaner burning, and that helps. But the reduction in traffic really is going to be the biggest lift in terms of that particular health equity question. The other questions around health equity, though, are access to healthcare facilities and whether you have that or not. Certainly, there's a question when people are older and they can no longer drive themselves. They need to rely on Access-a-Ride or neighbors or better transit, which we really need to build and provide better transit. There's also the health implications of people who don't walk enough, right? And so in terms of the street design question, we've not really designed our streets to accommodate walkers or cyclists very well. And those are two of the healthiest activities you can do. And if you don't want to spend hours in the gym, what better thing to do is there than to ride your bike or walk a distance to the activities that you'd be engaging in? Grocery shopping, your job.
Sure. I want to bring Robert Sinclair in on this, because I know, Robert, you're obviously, given what you do, you're an advocate for driving, and you and I have had these dialogues about driving versus mass transit. We could throw the notion of road diets in, which we have one on North Broadway here. There's one on Morris Park. They're talking about them in all different parts of the city. Is that one way to make it so that drivers and cyclists can live together? And of course, you got the e-scooters, which are everywhere, and they don't seem to follow any rules at all. I mean, they're driving on the sidewalk. We've seen fatalities on sidewalks. So I'm throwing all that at you, Robert. How do you balance this out so that bicyclists have their way, drivers have their way, and we do as good as we can health-wise?
Well, I think one of the things that we need to address is the congestion that we're seeing on our roads. You mentioned earlier, there's never been more traffic. And part of the reason right now is the fact that people have abandoned the Long Island Railroad, the subway, Metro North, New Jersey Transit, and have chosen to drive rather than using public transport. There has to be some sort of incentive to get drivers out of their vehicles and onto public transportation. Also, Rachel mentioned the fact that the particulate emissions from diesel vehicles, we have an inordinate number of trucks in our area. Most cities get probably 50% of their freight by rail, 50% by truck. In our area, it's upwards of 95% by truck.
Wow.
And because of that, we've got congestion. New York is out of compliance as far as EPA regulations is concerned, as far as particulate emissions. That's the combustion from diesel trucks. Congressman Nadler has for upwards of 20 years now been lobbying for a rail freight tunnel from New Jersey under Manhattan into Brooklyn or Queens to try and get all those trucks off the road that are coming to the city and Long Island. That is a major piece of infrastructure that would be necessary, and it would be game-changing as far as the traffic situation in our city is concerned. Now we're talking about the Gateway Tunnel and rebuilding the North River tunnels, as they were originally called when they were built back in 1910. But when they redo those tunnels, they should probably add a couple of extra tracks for freight trains. And the idea has been to have those freight trains go under Manhattan and go to some sort of rail transfer facility or onto Long Island Railroad tracks, right, to go to a rail transfer facility that was envisioned, I remember a decade or more ago, they were talking about on the grounds of the former Pilgrim State Hospital. And from there, you could have small step vans, even electrically powered step vans to deliver to their final location.
We're going to let Rachel weigh in on that. To me, it's always been interesting talking with you because, again, the AAA is an automobile association, but you are here advocating for alternatives so that it's better for drivers, better for everyone. Better for everyone. So Rachel Weinberger, let's use that as for your final thoughts and as a jumping off point. You like the idea, I assume, that you just heard from Robert Sinclair about, getting greater freight access by rail. How do we enact that? Is that it? How
do we enact that? Yeah. So first of all, I'll say most of the cross Bronx traffic, though, wouldn't be served by rail because it's not coming into the region. So the Port Authority is looking closely at Congressman Nadler's idea. There's also some ideas for barging some of that freight across. So that's all being looked at.
We've got about 30 seconds for you, so just make sure to get it in there.
Definitely need to be some solutions for that. I like Robert's idea that we need to get people back on transit. In fact, that's the only way that we're going to make any kind of dent or take a bite out of congestion is by having more people on transit. It's incredibly efficient. The Lincoln Tunnel bus lane, for example, carries 40 times more passenger traffic than the other lanes. So right. Transit, that's going to be the best solution for congestion, for pollution, and for health.
And Robert, for your final words, just talk about the AAA. How's membership doing? One would think you're doing better. Maybe people who are saying, you know what, I'm not, I need some help. I want some advice. I want to get some good information. Just give you 30 seconds to sell us on the AAA. I'm a member.
Well, AAA is many things. We advocate for drivers. We are into financial services, but I think people know us most for when we send a tow truck out when your vehicle is broken down, and we're seeing a lot more of that people with the bad economy are deferring maintenance on their vehicles. The average vehicle is 12 years old on the roads now, and we're seeing a lot of breakdowns. So I'm just worried that for a significant portion of the population, anywhere from 40, 50 to 60%, that the bad economy, the high gasoline prices is proving a burden for drivers when they're not have an alternative.
Listen, we got to run. I'm just going to add that those driver education programs you talked about, they'll save you money on your insurance. They'll save real money on the insurance. So that's another way to do it. Listen, we got to go. Robert Sinclair, Jr., Senior Manager of Public Affairs at AAA Northeast, thank you so much. Rachel Weinberger, Peter W. Herman Chair for Transportation at the Regional Plan Association, thank you. And we'll see you next week. We'll pick up something else that's going on in the Bronx, and we'll talk all about it. Good night.